I'm here with Juanita Peters at the Africville Museum here in Halifax. Now, perhaps you could give us a little bit of the genesis of the museum, how it came about,
Sure.
Its purpose.
Yeah. So the facility that we're sitting in here right now came as a result of the 2010 apology from Mayor Peter Kelly, the mayor of Halifax at the time. This facility is a replica of Seaview Baptist Church, which would have been the last church to exist in Africville. A population of 80 families, 400 people who came to this facility for not just worshiping, but it was the hub of the community. So conversations, important conversations, negotiations, anything that was happening that was important in community happened in this facility. So it was really important to see this rebuilt and to tell the long history, good and bad, of Africville.
So the church also would have been not just the center of the community, right? It would be where people would come to find out if there was work, what was going on.
Any conversations. It could be, we know that a certain community member is really unwell. You know, how are we going to gather together to help that person? It could be, you know, a problem with, it could be anything, you know, whether it's social or mechanical or, you know, imagined even, but anything that was on the minds of people of Africville, they would come here and have that discussion.
And of course they would worship, yes?
Yes, yes. Oh, did they ever? Not only did they worship, but the services here were very, very popular. And the baptisms, my goodness, people would come from miles around to come and watch people being baptized right here in the Bedford Basin. I don't know any other province or country that has such a thing. But in the African Nova Scotian community, there was something started by Richard Preston called the African United Baptist Association. And it tied together all the Black communities throughout the province. And there were many, over 40 communities. So within Africville, you would have sometimes more than one preacher who would service the church, and they might have two other churches as well that they serviced, but they were connected as one through the Baptist Association. People met each other, marriages happened, babies were born, you know, and the community just continued to grow and grow and grow.
Now, was there a permanent preacher here, or did you have, like in some parts of the United States, you would have had traveling preachers who would come?
No, they had, I think, permanent preachers for periods of time, yes.
Mm-hmm. And what about education? Would there be religious instruction here as well?
You know, I'm so glad you asked about that because, yes, the answer is yes. But also, when we think about education and who has, someone's probably asked you in your lifetime, who was your, you know, do you have one teacher that you remember in particularly the most because they did something special or they taught you something that was, you know, really important for the rest of your life? One thing that people may not know is that the very famous world, internationally known contralto, Portia White, actually taught here in Africville.
Really?
And so I've talked to a number of people who had her as a teacher and talked about that experience. And of course, they never knew at the time that she was going to be this world-renowned person. But what they did speak about was her ear, like how she listened to them so intently and how she would feed back what she was hearing from them. And they just found her to be just such a gentle soul. So, yeah.
What would the average child life be like here in Africville?
What I hear former residents talk about is the fact that the community was so close-knit. You knew everybody in every house. And I think that people who grow up or live in rural communities really understand that. So I've heard residents say, you know, if I fell down and I scraped my knee, I just went to the nearest house and that person would put a bandage on and, you know, you might get a little cup of soup or, you know, whatever, because everybody treated everybody's child like their own. I've also heard them talk about the freedom the freedom. You know, you didn't, their parents didn't worry about where they were because they were within community. And, you know, if you were looking for one child and you knew that they were with their cousin, if you found one, you found five, right? They also talk about things like berry picking, you know, playing on the water, you know, swimming all summer, or catching a fish. And, you know, in some ways it's a part of human existence that really doesn't exist too much today. All these things that these children did are things that we take our children to. We take them to go fishing. We take them to go skating. Here, the kids just put their skates on and went out the back door and skated on the pond, right? So it was a very different life than they were later introduced to.
I had something of the same experience when, you know, generational thing, right? Is that, you know, you would be sent out, right? Come home for lunch and told to come home when the street lights came on.
Yes.
Right? And you knew where everybody was because there'd be all these bikes on the lawn, right? And we'd all be at somebody's house, right?
Yeah.
You sort of made your own fun, you know? You went into the woods, you made your own little tree fort. So the experiences for the childhood at that time would have been pretty well common to everyone.
I have a couple former residents that always say, you know, and gee, like you say, you know, you did all kinds of things that you knew you weren't supposed to do.
Yes.
And if you weren't supposed to do it, and Mrs. So-and-so up the street saw, you better hurry home because she'll tell your mother before, and so you got in
That's
trouble
right.
both.
That's
You know, you got in trouble there, and then you got home and you got in trouble again.
That's right. And if you lived with your grandparents, which I did growing up.
Yeah, me too.
You'd get it from your grandmother, your grandfather, your mother, and then wait till your father gets home.
That's right.
So you got it 4 times.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
So you learn to be clever, right? And not get caught at it, right?
But there's so much that you don't even realize that you're gaining when you live in a family with that many generations in the same house. I look at my interest in story coming from that. I look at my interest in music really being inspired by my grandparents. And just the evolution of how we think about things, right? And so I can remember finally convincing my mother to let me do something. And my grandmother would say, "You're gonna let that girl do that?" And I'd be so mad because I knew my mother would go in my grandmother's direction. But it's all the things that they add unintentionally, and the same in this community. It was all those layers of instruction that were just done on a daily basis that were, you know, just food, you know, nourishment. I'd love to tell you about George Dixon.
I'd love to hear it.
Because a lot of people don't know, you know, that George Dixon was born in Africville in 1870. And he became the first Canadian to win a boxing championship. He was also the first black boxer, or the first black athlete, actually, to win a world championship in any sport. And so I look at him as a person of international significance. If you've ever heard of shadow boxing,
Yes.
that was created by George Dixon. And so people around the world still use that practice today. So that, I think, is quite amazing.
I know something about boxing. My father was a boxing fanatic, right? So I grew up with it. And I do know that the time frame that you're talking about, this isn't boxing as you would know it today. These rounds could go 60, 70 rounds. This was vicious sport. Yeah. And for this man to do that, right, is really remarkable.
You're absolutely right. And it also wasn't regulated in the way it is today. So a boxer might box here this afternoon and do 14, 50, 20 rounds.
Yes.
And then go across town and box again that day. There was, Nova Scotia's quite full of boxing greats. And another one would be Sam Langford. Sam Langford was considered, from Weymouth Falls, who was considered the champion who was never crowned. And so even, boxing enthusiasts say today that they had never seen a boxer like Sam Langford. But by that time, the whole race card was being played out. And so he was not given a chance to fight for that championship. But certainly the things that they were doing were groundbreaking at the time.
Now, back then, it was doubly difficult because you had the difficulty in terms of not getting a title shot because of your race. And the other part of it that's really not widely discussed with boxing well through the 50s and 60s in the 20th century was the mob influence. If you didn't play ball, you didn't get a title shot. And then when you had these boxers that were champions, when they would see somebody like a Sam Langford or a Dixon, they didn't want to get into the ring with them, right? So you had these problems, right? And it really didn't change until the 70s. Muhammad Ali was probably the best example of that.
Yeah.
Because nobody owned him, right? And he changed everything. He changed the face of boxing. Right?
I was never a boxing fan, and I was a huge fan of Muhammad Ali. First of all, as a little girl, I just thought he was so handsome. And he was so smart.
Whatever you say, I'm pretty as a girl.
Oh, yeah, and he was. He was so cute, and he was so funny.
He was funny.
He had such charisma around him. And I often looked at boxers from, my grandfather loved boxing, but I often looked at them as very hard people. I looked at them as, I didn't know how people could watch other people getting beat up. And even the fact that you could put your fist on somebody. I had no reference for violence, right? And so for me, this was just so strange that this was a thing that people would do and get paid to do as a kid. But what I remembered about Muhammad Ali wasn't the fight. It was more about him and how he spoke and how he liked to have fun. And those were the things that resonated with me about him. So, yeah.
And the other side of it is, if you were from a poor background, particularly if you were an immigrant or you were black, it was one of the few avenues open to you that you could raise yourself up.
That's absolutely true. So that was one of the few ways that you could rise economically and rise in the minds of society in terms of being able to do certain things or move in different ways in the world. And unfortunate, it's quite unfortunate that that's the type of thing that you had to do. But you're right, and then couple that with people who are coming out of backgrounds that have been quite unfair. And so you bring that with you too, so yeah.
And I remember watching a thing on Ali, a PBS special, and he talked about how when he came back from Rome and won the gold medal, he went into a restaurant and they wouldn't serve him.
Yeah.
And apparently he took the medal and he went to a bridge and he threw it in the water.
Yeah, it's no good here.
No good here, right?
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah.
today you would think that's insane,
Yeah.
right? It's crazy,
Yeah.
right? But
And
that's the life that he had to live through.
The same for our Nova Scotian, athletes and artists, and who will talk about going to Rome or Italy or whatever, and being accepted in hotels and whatever, and then they'd come back to Nova Scotia and back to the old reality. Yeah. And so I love. I don't want to keep talking about Muhammad Ali, but that's why the line that he says when they ask why he wouldn't go to war and fight in Vietnam, he says, "No Vietnamese has ever done anything to me. Why would I go and kill a Vietnamese when my enemy is right here at home?"
Has a point, doesn't he?
Right? And as much as we like to think as Canadians that we are more fair than other places in the world, it's not true. Sandy, there's a saying that I fight against every day, and it's that change takes time. I disagree wholly and heartedly, because you and I can get a phone call right now that will change our lives forever.
Lottery?
Or worse.
Or worse, yeah, true enough.
Right? Change happens in an instant, and it also only happens with change makers. I use the analogy that when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, the government of Canada decided that you would not be allowed to smoke in government offices. Well, at that time, I was smoking at my desk at the radio station. I was smoking in the hospital, visiting my uncles. I was smoking on the plane, going for a trip, right?
Yeah.
And I said, it'll never happen. Then you couldn't smoke in bingo halls? What?
You get murdered.
Smoking is an addiction, and I said, it'll never happen, right? Well, it happened. Province by province, you could no longer smoke in public places, right? Jump ahead 30 years. The government of Canada decides weed is legal, right? And it happened overnight. It takes will. No matter how ridiculous, whether you believe it or not, it takes will. One person who is in power has to decide this is how it's going to be. That's how change happens.
And I also think it happens when you have people of goodwill that understand that things are wrong and that you should try to fix these things.
Yes. So I think that you have to first understand the problem, but then you have to do something about it. So I grew up with all kinds of people of goodwill, right? But they didn't have the power. They didn't have the power to change things. You know, even through the Jim Crow era, there were lots of people who had, you know, really great hearts and knew that it wasn't wrong, it was wrong, but they didn't have the power, right? And so if they were to allow me in their restaurant if I was in a Jim Crow area, they stood the chance of getting their place firebombed, right? Which happened all the time. It takes somebody at a higher level in power to say, this is the law, this is the way it's going to be, and if you do not adhere to it, you will be punished.
Now, I would imagine that the lives of the people of Africville has changed significantly, yes?
Yes. So we talked about what it was like living in Africville, you know, living on the water, living in a community where everybody knew each other. Let's talk about the fact that people lived in houses for generations. You know, the land that they lived on, my grandfather lives over there, my great-grandfather's over here, my great-uncles, you know, that's the community that they lived in. What changed was when the city of Halifax decided to level Africville. And now the people of Africville had to find new places to be. And when you live in an area for generations, the concept of that isn't here, it's not formed. And so some people were able to go out and buy houses in other neighboring Black communities, and let's start there. Because Africville had been given this bad, had this bad narrative around it, it wasn't easy for people to just go out and find places because people were like, oh, they're from Africville, we don't want them. A large majority of people wound up in public housing, which was completely different than they were used to. If you can imagine, now you're living around people that you've never even heard of before. They have different ways of being. It's concrete, no grass, no water. You're paying now, which today people think is normal. Everyone today thinks it's normal to be paying a rental fee every month and a mortgage fee every month. People think it's normal to be paying a mortgage until you've retired. That's not normal. You normally build something, you pay for it, and you live in it, and you build equity through life, right? So the world changed drastically in breaking everybody apart. They're all scattered all over. It's very sad.
The displacement of the people. There was no plan for this, right?
Yeah.
What was the reason they knocked Africville down?
So what was said publicly, people were shown areas of Africville and said, look what an awful place this is, right? It has rats, it has, what the city didn't say is we created those rats. We put an open dump behind people's houses.
And then blamed the other people for the rats.
Which attracted all those things. They put an infectious disease hospital above Africville. And then all the waste from that infectious disease hospital went into the open dump and into the soil. They brought all the contaminants from industry here, surrounded the community with all the things that would depreciate your health and your lifestyle and your chances of economic wealth. They didn't tell the public that.
No, they didn't. I wonder why.
Right? Mm-hmm. So had people understood that, I've had so many people come to me and say, when the destruction of Africville was being contemplated, I thought, yes, they should. They should put those people in somewhere better. That looks awful. That sounds awful. What they didn't know is that these were tax-paying citizens who were not getting the benefits that you and I get from paying taxes. They weren't getting
the services, were they?
That's right.
Now, I always thought it was for the new bridge.
So that was part of it too. So they used the urban renewal as part of that conversation as well. But you will see the bridge exists and the land is vacant. The conversation of urban renewal was happening all across the country. And it did happen in many places across the country in different ways. The difference with this community was its longevity here. And the other difference was the fact that they used what the city had created as the impetus for moving people out.
They created the problem, and then now they have the solution.
Right, and then shone a light on it and said, you know, look what these people have done.